All right. I think I'm gonna get going, and then whoever joins, they can either keep from that point on and then watch the replay. All right. So welcome everyone. Today we're focusing on something critical for all kinds of organizations today, and I'm really focusing on highly regulated industries, and it is how to responsibly manage AI systems that you may already be using or planning to deploy in your organizations, but not necessarily that you're developing these systems. And basically, I've been in operational excellence. Um, I've been in operational excellence for over 25 years, started in aerospace, moved to healthcare almost 15 years ago. And then actually I worked in finance for about 3 or 4 years in the middle there. And so I have worked in those three major highly regulated industries that I'm going to be kind of focusing on. And I'm passionate about high reliability. And I found that these frameworks, and I'm going to be focusing on ISO 42001 today, but they speak to me because they are really focusing on kind of like adding that high reliability piece to deploying HI and using HI. So over throughout the webinar today, I'm going to kind of like tie it down all down to the two pillars that I'm calling of responsible AI, and those are excellence and trust. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. Um, so today we'll cover why AI governance matters and why it matters now. I'm going to, like I said, dive slightly deeper into one particular standard, which is ISO 42001. I'm going to get into the core controls that this standard provides, and then I'm going to cover like an implementation roadmap that you can start implementing few things over the next 90 days. So if you use third-party AI solutions, this webinar is for you. If you work in highly regulated industries like healthcare, aerospace, and finance, this webinar is for you. If you work if you are responsible for compliance, risk management, or operations, this webinar is for you. And if you need to ensure trustworthy AI for your organization and your customers, this webinar is for you. Now, what I'm not going to be focusing on, because many AI governance discussions already focus on developers, right? The big companies that are developing, but today is going to be different. So I'm not going to be touching on anything that has to do with machine learning or building algorithms or any of that stuff. It's going to be focusing on the people that are using and deploying AI in their organizations. Um, so again, the two pillars that I'm kind of basing this on are excellence and trust. Excellence, what does that mean? Well, it's the operational reliability and performance. We can use AI to make our businesses better, and that's what we're using it for. We want to continue providing high quality outcomes consistently, and we want to achieve that competitive advantage that AI promises. But we also want to do that by building trust, by building stakeholder confidence, whether we're talking about our customers, our regulators, employees, and we want to make sure that we're using AI ethically so that it can also support and our long-term reputation, right? Sometimes it's very, very hard to build a reputation, and but to lose it is really easy. So we want to make sure that we're deploying responsible AI to build that long-term reputation and sustain that reputation long-term. So excellence without trust is fragile, and trust without excellence is empty. So why does this matter, and why does this matter now? Well, something we are calling a regulatory tsunami, right? So AI started kind of like all over the place, and then governments and regulatory organizations started to realize that we have to put some boundaries, some controls around this. So some examples, most people have heard about the European Union AI Act, which started enforcing last August, and it's actually going to be fully enforced by August 2027. There's actually, in this process of me researching this, there's actually a an a U.S. executive order called the National Artificial Intelligence Initiative Act, and this thing is buried into a 5,000 page document. But it's very interesting. It's very interesting that the things that the government is already requiring from vendors and from actually from not even not it doesn't have to be their own vendors, but to protect society. And there's also a few state level in the United States, state level regulations that are already emerging. So early adopters of governance frameworks will get ahead of this instead of waiting for regulation to kind of start hitting you. Now, this one is also very interesting. The hidden AI proliferation. There's studies that show that some organizations, most average enterprises, are using more than 40 AI-enabled tools. And there's this term that started popping up in the last few months, which is called shadow AI. Shadow AI is because people and departments are kind of like adopting these AI solutions. They are using them, and they're using them without oversight. And so what's actually happening is that organizations may have some of these things, but they don't even realize that they have them. And some legacy systems may also have embedded AI that organizations are not even aware of. Now, there are stakeholder expectations, right? Customers now more than ever, we're seeing in the news, right? How many times there's been lawsuits about companies that did not disclose that their data was being shared with AI applications. So this is all what's happening right now, and this is interesting. And I can tell you firsthand of this one. The insurance required AI governance frameworks. I just had to update my business insurance for my business because for my consulting business, and it took them about 3 days to approve certain pieces of it because of this AI portion of it, because I'm working within AI. And so there's all these frameworks and things that you want to be aware of. Now, a KPMG study uncovers some disturbing trends. For example, 44% of employees have used AI. And then there's 57% of employees who have made mistakes due to AI, and 58% have relied on the output from the AI without even verifying it. And this is surveys by KPMG, right? So again, this is right here, and we just have to get in front of it. Otherwise, we're going to be paying the price for not getting ahead of it, right? And so people may say, our customers aren't talking about AI yet. We're not using much of AI yet. And to those, we say, you are already using AI. You may just not know how much. Your customers will want to make sure that you're governing AI and limiting risks. And the cost of waiting is there's studies that show that reactive governance, meaning putting governance in place after the fact, after you've been hit with penalties and fines, it's 3 to 5 more times than expensive, right? So we definitely want to make sure that we know what's at stake, and we know some of the things that we can do to mitigate some of that framework. So that's where ISO 42001 comes in. It is ISO 42001, right? It's an international standard that was launched first in 2023, and it was revised last year. And one of the things, so if you follow some of the posts that I've been sharing, I read this thing probably more than 3 times by now. And the first time I read this thing, I was almost like, I just felt like something didn't jive. Something was like missing, or I did not get everything. So I went back and read it. And so by talking to other people, by actually starting to implement some of these things, I started realizing what I was actually quote unquote missing. And it is that it's this risk-based approach. And it's not a one size fits all. So what you're not going to find in the standard is a cookie cutter recipe to follow for every organization, because one of the first things every organization has to do is actually determine what's acceptable risk, and they have to determine a bunch of internal things. So it is it is a framework, but the nitty gritty of it is actually going to depend very specifically on every organization. And so that took for me some time for me to get used to. But then when I think more about it, because when we think about other standards like 27001 and 9001, which we who practice quality have been very familiar with 9001, they kind of are like that too, right? So you don't have a cookie cutter recipe for that. So ISO is just following their format. So it covers the full AI system life cycle. We'll talk a little bit about that, but I'm not going to get too deep into that today. And then it applies to any organization. And that's, I'm talking a lot about highly regulated industries because these are the ones that are going to get hit first. But for any organization that is using or deploying AI systems, this standard will really, really be useful in helping people mitigate some of the risks. Now, one of the things that really resonates with me is the PDCA structure of these standard as well. So PDCA, I mentioned my 25 years experience. This is basically what I've been using my entire 25 years of in my career, and it's the plan, do, check, act cycle. And so the framework is kind of follows that. And so when you talk about planning, we're going to talk a little bit about context and scope and leadership commitment and starting to do some risk assessments. And then we actually go and implement the controls. That's the doing phase. We are actually going to start documenting process. And then the check phase is really about monitoring the performance of what we call the AI management system. We're going to do some internal audits. We're going to measure the effectiveness. And then the acting phase is where we actually, a couple of things. We may have to implement some corrective actions if things actually went through the cracks, but we also want to make sure that we continue to improve, that we continue to improve the actual management system, the what we call the aims. Now, why does AI need special management? Well, because AI is not traditional software. And things like automated decision making, the use of AI, these systems make decisions in ways that are sometimes non-transparent. So we have no idea how they got to a point or to a decision, and that's not okay. We have to make sure that we're able to explain and we have transparency in the AI's decisions. Saying these systems actually learn after they've been deployed. So this is not like traditional software where what you get from your vendor is what is going to continue to operate. What you get from your vendor is going to continue to learn and modify itself. So we have to have some required special considerations to ensure that we're using this responsible. Now, there's also the use of data, right? So I'm not going to get technical here, but there's bias and things in the data that feed these systems. And there's some societal impacts that we want to make sure that we are aware of, that we're providing for. Now, the standard provides that structure certifiable. Like I mentioned, there's actually a certification that can be pursued. I'm not necessarily focusing on that, but it's basically to help organizations develop, provide, and use those AI systems responsibly. Bottom line is whatever your IT regular run-of-the-mill IT governance is not going to be enough. Now, the standard has these nine controls. And like I said, these controls tell you kind of like what to do and to a certain extent how to do it, but it's not a cookie cutter. So one of the things that the first things that we have to do is an AI policy. It doesn't have a template for that AI policy. It tells you the things that should be covered by that AI policy. And those are kind of like the examples of what I was telling you about. It really tells you what and how, but it really doesn't tell you. It's almost like a recipe, but it doesn't tell you exactly like a teaspoon of this and a tablespoon of that. And so these are the major controls of the framework. I don't have time, nor I think there will be a lot of interest in me covering a lot of these, because the standard is actually written for all kinds of AI actors. And it could mean people that are actually developing AI, which I said I'm not going to focus on that. So a lot of these standards are heavy on that. However, we also need to be aware of that, because when we buy systems, when we acquire AI systems, we need to know how they were developed. So when we think about when we look at the foundation of our AI management system, our AIMS, as I call it for short, um, the standard actually is divided into 10 clauses and 4 annexes. If you saw the video that I published a couple of weeks ago, also kind of gives you a really quick overview of the standard and what the different clauses cover. So in clause 4, the first 3 clauses are very generic, and then the content really starts in clause 4. And so we start talking about what's the context of the organization, what is the environment of the organization externally and internally, and then you define your role. And like I said, you can have a role of a user, you're a user of AI, you're a developer of AI, and you're a provider of AI. So a lot of people think, well, I'm a user. And that's kind of like who I'm targeting here. But also the thing that the standard makes us do is makes us ask questions. And so if you are a user, but you're also kind of using it for interactions with your customers, if you're in healthcare, interactions with your patients, then you're already providing that, right? So you're a user, but also a provider. And so it is important to look at what your role is in this whole ecosystem. And then we have to secure leadership commitment. Like anything that any kind of big initiative that we do this a lot with high reliability, right? With Lean Six Sigma, all of those things. We always have to secure management's buy-in and management's commitment. And they actually are the ones that who should be championing the governance, right? And they are the ones that establish the policy. And then we go into this risk-based approach. So one of the things that I mentioned is the standard forces you to look really internally and say, what risk do we accept? What is an acceptable risk? What is unacceptable risk? And based on that is what you're going to develop as far as your controls and the things that you're going to put in place. So that's why I was saying the standard cannot give you specific guidance. It gives you a lot of good guidance, but it actually makes you really, really look internally and look at what you're going to. It makes you one of the valuable things of the standard is the questions it asks, and it makes you ask those questions of yourself and of your organization. And then it's very heavy on documentation. So building on the excellence and trust pillars again. Leadership commitment drives that excellence in execution, and then documentation builds that trust through transparency and auditability. When you look at your AI systems, you can categorize them by the risk level. And once you do that, then you can determine how much you need to govern them. So, for example, you may find that some risk is prohibited. It's unacceptable. Your criteria, this is unacceptable. We're not even going to accept that. And then some examples is because it may introduce some manipulation of people's motivations and things like that. And so your action here or your governance intensity here may be just we're not going to deploy the system. Some things that are high risk, it has significant impact on the rights and safety and on the livelihoods of people, then you may want to add some kind of governance, some really, really extensive controls, and make sure that you're doing those impact assessments really often. Examples of that, kind of like medical diagnosis AI in healthcare, credit decisions, hiring tools in different organizations. Those are high risk. Now, there's some that have a little bit less of risk, which basically what it means is you have to be transparent. So you have to your governance here might mean you have to disclose, right? You have to provide some basic oversight. Things like chatbots and content filters that provide people some suggestions of what they may be interested in. And then some minimal risk when you don't expect to add any harm. You may just have to do very light governance with these. Some examples here in healthcare, right? Something high risk would be anything that has to do with an actual patient, right? So maybe you have AI-assisted diagnostic tools or patient triage algorithms. Those are high risk. In aerospace, for example, we have maintenance for different very safety critical components. If you're using AI to to create those schedules and to do that predictive maintenance, then you need to consider that's high risk. And in finance, things that are like fraud detection, that are blocking transactions, we know how much we love those, right? And then algorithmic trading, when we're in the markets, right? A few seconds of mistakes could actually cost billions of dollars of losses for those industries. And so these are kind of like an idea of, you as an organization have to determine what's high risk, what's limited risk, and what's minimal risk. And of course, there's some guidelines there, but this is part of the introspection that every organization has to go through. All right, real quick, put it in the chat. What does the standard primarily help organization management is managed? Is it AI algorithm development, AI system governance and responsible use, cloud infrastructure, or cybersecurity threats? Let me open the chat because I don't have the chat open here. So A, B, or C? All right, I have B, B. I was gonna do a Kahoot quiz, but I didn't have time to do this. So that way we can all like compete and really get competitive about it. All right, so I think everybody agrees it is about AI system governance and responsible use. For example, which of these is a high-risk application under the principles we just discussed? An email spam filter, a medical diagnosis assistant, an office thermostat optimization, or a document search tool? A, B, or C, or D? Yay! All right, we agree. ISO 42001 is designed only for organizations that develop AI systems. Is that true or false? True or false? A, true, B, false. ISO 42001 is designed only for organization. Okay, I got an F. I'm assuming that means false. B, false. That's right. We also include any organization that is using or deploying AI system. And which of these is not one of the pillars we discuss that I'm kind of like building AI governance on? Excellence, trust, or efficiency, which is not one of the two pillars that we discussed. Interesting. So I'm actually building these on excellence and trust. So the one that I did not send this because I mean to me efficiency is part of being excellent. And so when I talk about excellence, I mean about that operational reliability and things like that. So what the two pillars that I kind of I'm basing, I'm kind of like formatting these under are the standards allow us to continue to be and have operational excellence while building trust. And I think efficiency kind of, in my mind, efficiency is part of that excellence. But thank you for participating. Now, what are some of the core controls? So I showed you the 9 controls. I'm going to try to cover these 7 here. Do a quick overview of this. We are pretty much halfway through. So, and then I definitely want to have some time for interactions. Yes, I'm definitely want to have some time for interaction for Q&A at the end. So let's get into it. The first thing, like I mentioned, is the AI policy. And one of the things that, again, you have to ensure that your AI, that you're implementing AI, is aligned with your business goals. It's not just like we're going to have this tool because it's cool, right? Because we want to show our customers that we're cool, that we're adopting AI. No, we have to align it with business strategy. And this is what the second one here is the one I was telling you about, is the risk tolerant definition. Every organization has to agree, right? Leadership has to agree what's the level of AI risk that we're willing to accept. And then we have to have some really hard conversations about fairness, transparency, and accountability, which are these ethics principles that AI really kind of like starts getting into some of those, right? We're going to define what's prohibited use. And also, it's important to understand how these already integrate with some policies that we may already have in-house, right? So when we look at roles, well, I mentioned the role a few minutes ago where you're looking at what is your role as an organization in the AI ecosystem, user, developer, or deployer. Now, when you look internally at the organization, we also have to develop roles around this governance, right? Things like your AI policy owner, your AI risk manager, your AI ethics officer. And when you start looking at this list, you realize that some of these things look like some things I already know about, right? So a risk manager. So maybe what it means is we add this to our risk function, right? We don't have to create an AI risk function, but it may behoove us to actually use what we already have in place. An example that I encountered was with an aerospace manufacturer that I work with. They appointed their safety engineering director as their AI risk manager. This is a person that already has plenty of expertise in safety and things like false positives in predicting and things like that. So it may be a good opportunity and a good idea to include these things in functions that we already have. Now, an AI policy owner, yeah, that may be a new role, but it also usually we see people like a chief compliance officer or a chief information officer or a chief technical officer in or a chief digital transformation office in healthcare. We have seen those. So we these are some of the roles that we have to make sure that we define. But like what I'm trying to say is that these are not new roles. We may be expanding some of the roles that we already have. Now, the important thing here is accountability has to be clear and documented, right? So this is a very, very interesting one that I wanted to get to. AI system inventory. If you read the standard, and this is what I think, this is again one of those reasons why I had to read this thing like 3 times already. The standard doesn't even have the word inventory in it, and I know because I searched. So it is very interesting that it doesn't tell us that we have to do an AI system inventory. But here's the thing: to do this, the things that the standard is asking you to do, well, you have to know all the systems, the AI systems that are operating in your organization. So one of the annexes talk about documentations for managing the AI system lifecycle, which is from the moment you acquire it to the moment you sunset it and everything in between. Well, how are you going to do that if you don't know all the systems that you have in place? Then there's the risk management clause that establishes management policies to the AI systems that you have. Again, it doesn't tell you to go out and do an AI system inventory, but it's kind of like telling you to go build a house, but it doesn't tell you to go, get the materials. It's basically you have to do this. And there's so many clauses and examples in the standard that imply that you have to do a system inventory. And so this was very interesting to me. And the things that we want to capture, we want to make sure that what's the system and what does it do? Who is the vendor or provider? Was it developed in-house? Was it, how something we acquired? And then again, we have to go risk classifications. What data fits it? How many other systems is it touching? What are some of the things that it is doing? We have to understand this of every system. So some of the ways we can actually find this is through surveys. Department heads. What are the tools that your people are currently using? And that forces people to go in and find things. And again, this is like some of the things we do when we're talking about operational excellence and high reliability. Managers go out and find out that what they thought was happening is not what's happening. this is not different here, right? So you cannot assume what's happening. You have to go out and find out what's really happening. Um, Auditing software licenses, if there are some out there, those are going to give you an idea of what's being deployed. And the main thing here is we cannot govern what we cannot see, what we're aware of, right? Um, Now, kind of like the engine or the very important pieces of these standard are the AI system impact assessments. Okay, so they kind of go from this. These actually help us go from this purely technical thing to how it actually what the actual human importance of this system is. So for example, it is a process to evaluate how the AI system affects individuals, groups, or the society in as a scope. Some of the questions that it forces you to ask of yourself and your organization are who's affected by these systems decisions? Can it produce some unfair or discriminatory outcomes? Is the system transparent and explainable? What happens when the system fails or makes an error? Are there vulnerable populations at higher risk? And do the affected parties have recourse? And I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the interactions that we can have with vendors. But this is just understanding what we have in-house here. So again, it's forcing you through to think through these consequences. So again, we're going to that excellence, and it's building trust by demonstrating that you consider the impact to your stakeholders. An example in healthcare, right? We have that triage system, AI-powered triage system, and we go out and we do an impact assessment and we find out. And by the way, we're not just trying to find out the negatives here. The first thing we find out is what are the positive impacts of these tools, for example. Well, it enables faster patient prioritization, it reduces wait times, and it standardized triage criteria. These are good things, right? We these are the things we want the AI to allow us to achieve. But then, what are some of the potential negative impacts? Well, there may be some bias risk depending on where the data came from. In this case, most of the data came from a like an urban population, which may misdiagnose or misclassify some rural patients' symptoms. The over reliance, right? We've heard a lot about this, not only in healthcare, but it's like people actually deferring judgment to the AI because it feels like it knows so much, and without clinical judgment. And then we don't have that much transparency. We don't understand why it made those decisions. So again, this is an example of what happens or what we can gain from doing these impact assessments. So when you find those things, there are some mitigating actions that you can do, right? So you can always make sure that the nurse retains the final authority, make sure that the algorithm is tested in diverse populations, and have a communication protocol to your customers, in this case, your patients, right? Something that says that you are using technology or even specifically AI to help in some of the decisions. And then, of course, we want to make sure that we're conducting audits and things like that to make sure that the system does not provide biased decisions. So the key point here about the data is, well, you may not control the training data, but you control the input data quality. Things like, and how many times have we seen this, right? So missing fields, errors in the data entry. This goes back to the old adage that is still true: garbage in, garbage out, right? So the quality of data is going to define the quality of the data input is going to define the quality of the output. Now, when it comes to data provenance, we have to also ask some questions. We have to know where the data came from, what kind of populations it covers, has it been validated? So understanding the dependencies of your data. Now there's a standard. There's a one of those controls that I mentioned at the beginning. It's called the responsible use. Actually, it's control number 8. It's actually called responsible use, and this is a very all-encompassing uh, part of the standard, is part of the controls, and it gets into this human oversight. So you may have heard about human in the loop um, deployments. This is basically saying that we have to keep humans as the final, that last point of defense when the AI is making these decisions. And so there are three levels that we should consider depending on the risk, right? So you can actually, one of the things that we want to encourage here is that humans are not the weakness in the AI system; they're the safeguarders, and we want to make sure that we keep that human involved. Now, because of the different risks that we may have more involvement or less involvement. So we have human in the loop, we have human on the loop, and we have human in command. So the highest level of risk means that we need to make sure that those decisions are reviewed by a human. A smaller level of risk means that we need to monitor those decisions, but we can allow the system to operate. We just have to monitor closely. And then a low level of risk, we may just have to do periodic audits depending on the outputs that we're seeing. These are some examples. I think I'm going to bypass these again from healthcare, aerospace, and finance. What would require human in the loop? So in this case, a radiologist that reviews all the abnormalities, an engineer that approves all the maintenance recommendations, and a law officer that reviews all the decisions. Again, the highest level of risk requires the higher, more human involvement. Again, excellence and trust. So when we talk about monitoring and performance management, we have to keep our excellence metrics, right? We are putting AI in place because it promises that we're going to be either more efficient, more effective, it's going to be faster, something we're going to gain from this system. So we have to make sure that we're measuring those things, right? Are we getting accuracy? Are we getting error rates? Response times, whatever it is, our metrics. This is one of those things that we're always big when we start projects, right? What are our performance metrics? But in this case, we also have to add metrics that help us foster and build that trust. Things such as bias and fairness metrics, right? So is the output fair to all demographic groups? Are there false positives or negatives by different groups? There's data drift. I'm not going to get into, like I said, technical details, but there might be things that the model wasn't trained on, and we're applying the model to things that are not, that the model is not trained on. Sometimes we talk about edge cases, right? Things that are, the model was trained on all these things, and then when we have these edge cases, the model may not be appropriate to that. And then this whole thing about the model changing behavior over time. Are the outputs becoming less reliable? Is the systems changing over time, behavior changing over time? So we have to start measuring those things. We have to be paying attention to those things. Okay, so documentation isn't just red tape, isn't bureaucracy, it's evidence of our responsible use of AI. And I like to call it the immune system, right? We can look at documentation in three layers. So we have the strategic layer. What does that mean? We have our AI policy well documented. We have AI objectives. What are we using this for? And we have some risk criteria and risk tolerance. Remember those things that we say we have to define. Then we have an operational layer in which we have that AI system inventory. We have impact assessment. We have to create impact assessments for every system that we have. Again, reason why we need to have an AI system inventory. We have to have treatment plans for those risk assessments. Supplier agreements. I'm going to talk a little bit about third-party vendors and how we can manage or make sure that we are doing the right things here. And human oversight procedures. And then the evidence layer, the highest level of documentation we want to have, things like monitoring logs and reports, making sure that we are documenting how we're monitoring the systems, incident reports and resolutions, those show our customers that we're building trust, right? We're being transparent, which is usually not the currency of these days. And then management review meeting minutes. Sometimes we definitely want to make sure that we document those. Now, I'm not focusing on certification, but these 15 documents are required by ISO 42001. But even if you don't pursue certification, these documents really form like the backbone of your AI management system. I divided them into kind of like strategic foundation, risk and impact, people and processes, communication and control, and then monitoring and improvement. You don't create these documents just to pass an audit, but it actually, because it makes you better. So this is a list of documents that I can absolutely share with you. If you need to, you can obviously take a picture of the slide. I'm going to also send you a checklist at the end of different things that you can do to comply with ISO 42001. And the other thing I want to emphasize is that you don't have to create all 15 documents all at once, right? I'm going to give you a roadmap of how to start focusing on a couple of things first. So for example, the foundation, you can work on those for the first 30 days, then that's like getting the leadership commitment, drafting your policy, defining the scope. And then in the next 30 days, you can have risk and impact, which are like the second tier here. And by day 90, you'll have the core of your AIMS system codified and documented and operational. And then we have to build on something, right? We have to start somewhere. So it kind of tells you what the different sections, what the different categories of these are. Some of them are to set the direction, identifying what can go wrong, ensuring accountability, and all of that. So this is a list. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's a good list of documents that you may want to have. So I think I'm going to bypass the quiz. And then let's talk a little bit about third party. So when you acquire systems from third parties, right? Why is it important to pay some special attention? Well, again, that black box problem. You don't know how the model was trained. You may not know what the training data looks like. And then this whole thing about pointing fingers, right? Where does the vendor responsibility end? Where does my responsibility begin? Who's accountable when something goes wrong? I can guarantee you that if that's not clear, the vendor is not going to say they are accountable, right? Now there are some contract requirements that people are already starting to ask when they are negotiating with vendors that we're going to talk about. But for the existing contracts that you have, there may be some gaps there, especially because standard software agreements don't cover AI-specific risks and things like a dependency risk. So the vendor can update the system whenever they want. They may make changes to the model, and you have no control and sometimes not even knowledge of that. So we have to find ways to manage that. Now, there are some critical questions that we can ask, and I've divided those in 5 categories here as well. Number 1 is, how was the model trained, right? What kind of data was used? What steps were taken to mitigate bias? Have they taken any steps to mitigate bias? In performance and limitation, well, that's what we want the system for again, right? Are there some benchmarks? What are some of the failure modes or limitation of the system? This is what I'm getting the system for, to help me be better. I need to ask some questions about that. And then, of course, transparency and explainability. This is part of that ethics part, right? So fairness, transparency, explainability. Can the decisions be explained? Do we know where the decisions come from? What kind of documentation you provide to users? And then ongoing support and updates, things to us vendors is like, well, how frequently is the model updated? Will I have knowledge of that? Will I have some input on those updates? What kind of behavior may I expect once the models are changed? And then accountability and liability, big one. Who's liable when things happen, right? What kind of indemnification do you provide? Do you maintain insurance for AI-related claims? I can tell you I do because, like I mentioned at the very beginning, this is something that my business insurance already requires me to carry. It's AI risk. And so you, as a consumer of AI systems, you have more than your right to ask for these things. And people may say, you know what, my vendors are not going to go for this, right? We've been with these people forever. They're not going to go for it. Well, guess what? A lot of people are starting to require this. A lot of people are starting to ask about this, and they have to start providing these answers. They have to start providing some of these agreements, and if they don't, they're going to start losing business. And it may be a time for you to then reevaluate those relationships, right? Actual requirements that we've seen in some cases already is bias and fairness commitments. We need to get those commitments from those vendors. Audit right. Some uh, consumers, some buyers are putting in their contracts some clauses there about auditing rights. Do they have the right to audit the system or the training data or whatever it is? And then again, liability and indemnification. There's many more, and there's actually cases in healthcare that and in finance that are actually already happening. So this is already happening, and if you're not doing this, this is a good opportunity for you to start doing this when you're starting to negotiate your vendor contracts. Okay, this one I can do because it's a really quick one. Your vendor claims that the AI is completely unbiased. What should be your response to it? Trust them because they're the experts. Request evidence and conduct your own impact assessment. Not use any AI tools from vendors or only use AI for low risk applications. A, B, C, D. All right. All right. Good. Everybody's in agreement. Conduct your own impact assessment. Request the evidence. Don't take their word for it. Now, if you follow what I've been sharing the last few weeks, or the last, I think I shared this earlier this week. Like I said, you don't have to do it all at once. You can start small. Here is a 90-day quick start plan that will allow you to have a functional system by the end of the next 90 days, starting with really focusing on leadership, commitment, AI policies, understanding your risk, and then building, allocating the resources, assigning the roles and responsibilities, really getting into those impact assessments, which are going to be kind of like I said, the engine, because based on those impact assessments, then you can start implementing some controls and and then start having some decisions on how much oversight you have to do, and then having the internal audits and management reviews, and then of course continuous improvement. You get started, and then you want to see how else you can improve it. Things you can do immediately, where to start? Well, your AI system inventory, that should take anywhere from half a day to a day, depending on the size of your organization or the size of the parts that your purview. Drafting the AI policy. There may be some templates that you can already use, and then some vendor contract reviews. And I would say, of course, you don't have to audit every vendor all at once, but let's look at what are some of the higher risk systems that you acquired from vendors and start looking at those contracts. Things like designating roles and starting to do the impact assessment, risk impact assessments on some of your higher risk systems. That gives you about 30 to 50 hours of work to establish some really solid foundation here. These are some ideas of how you can start some of these things. It's It's 11, it's 12:52. So I think I'm going to just say that there are some implementation pitfalls that we have to be aware of. Things like treating AI governance as IT governance, boiling the ocean, trying to do everything at once, doing things just, we call it sometimes window dressing or putting lipstick on a pig, right? Not understanding what our vendors are providing and then ignoring culture and doing it as a one-time exercise. Good news is there are some frameworks that are already they integrate very nicely with 42001. If you have like information security, ISO 27001, this integrates very well with it. And then, of course, ISO 9001 is very, you can actually integrate very well with ISO 9001 and gain some efficiencies there. So that's the good news. And then in next steps, you're aware now, so now you have to take some action. Things like committing to conducting a full AI system inventory within the next 30 days. That's something I encourage you to commit to do. How do you bring this to your organization? Maybe doing a cross-functional AI governance working group, propose that to your leadership, make them aware, and then making sure that decisions don't wait for an incident or a regulatory demand or a customer thing. Just be proactive, right? The leaders who act now will achieve that excellence and trust. And so with that, I so send me a PM or an email and I'll send you the checklist. Here, this QR code will take you to the page to register for the next webinar. Because of how busy the next few weeks are for me, I scheduled this for March 19th. So it's 5 weeks from now. And again, time is about 12 p.m. So you can use this QR code and I will leave it here so you can find the page and register for that. And with that, let's hear some questions that you may have or some comments. I don't know what. Okay, I have my hand up for some reason here. Okay, hold on. Does ISO 42001 apply only to systems or software that the company buys, uses, or to the use of LLM by employees? For example, if an employee uses ChatGPT, do some research. Yep. So that's one of the things that ISO 42001 forces you to do in an organization is find out what systems people are using. And yes, ChatGPT is the most prevalent example of how people are using that, especially when they start uploading things to ChatGPT that are proprietary or are customer information or confidential information. So yes, this is one of those controls that when you do your AI system inventory, we need to find out what people are using and how they're using it. So yes, this definitely applies here. Yep, it's for the tools that people are using everywhere. Yes. What other questions do you have? Fernando, you came out of the, how do I get my lower hand? There we go. Comments, questions? Was everything that clear? Or was everything that muddy that you don't even know what questions you have? No, you can always obviously engage with me and I love talking about this stuff. So absolutely. Learning more. Okay, do malpractice insurance policy include AI clauses? That's a great question. That's a great question. I would venture to say that if they don't now, they they will start including them because of the same reason that I was mentioning that my insurance now includes AI risk insurance. And the bad thing is insurance companies doesn't even know what to charge for it, so they're charging a lot for them, just to be safe, I think, until they get more experience about this. But that's a great question, Tio Henry. I think if they don't have them, they will start having them pretty soon, especially when things like decision um, what is it, decision assistance methods are being used. Clinical decisions like triage decisions and things like that are being used. Decision support is what I was trying to say, for decision support. So that's a great question, and I would imagine that this is, if it is not happening already, it's coming soon.
Can I ask a question in the microphone?
You have a question, Fernando?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, man.
So, since with most ISO systems, most companies have accountability at different levels. And obviously, when you look at, for example, information security, the accountability comes to certain members of the organization, but specifically the leadership. How do you manage this? How will you advise someone who's working with such systems to to discuss this accountability with the leadership, especially the top leadership who may not necessarily be entirely savvy about the technicalities of AI.
Yes, that's something that I wanted to mention in that whole leadership, and when we're talking about the AI policy and the commitment from leadership, it is like, when we deploy operational excellence, Lean Six Sigma, anything like that, yes, we want the leadership to support and to practice, right? And lead by example. But this requires everyone in the organization to be cognizant and to be very conscientious about what they are doing, what is happening. And so um, the way, the way there is, when you define those roles and responsibilities, we also define training, right? And a big part, and I always have mixed feelings about training, right? But a big part about that is when people, how we training people at different various levels of the organization. Do they need awareness? Do they need more than that, right? And so this thing cannot be successful if it doesn't have the support of everyone in the organization. But in terms of the leaders not being savvy about this, then again, we also need to provide the training for the leaders, right? And so part of this is just today making people aware of, but then we really have to get into some of these very involved parts of the standard. Now, when you have the different people involved, like we said, that your risk manager, these are people that already are familiar with kind of like some of these risk management standards work. So we want them to be involved when we're drafting these policies and things like that. So I think it's going to need people to kind of learn as they go through it. The important thing is that we have to start.
Thank you. That is awesome. I I work in a tech company. We just went through the ISO 27000 certification, and well, it takes a lot of preparation and knowledge and getting people to know what they do, what they have, especially creating the awareness. Now, I think this is a great opportunity for AI, but there aren't many people in the organization who may know or be very savvy about AI. So there is an opportunity here to get more information, experience, and especially when we hear a lot about companies adopting AI, I'm not sure they have a roadmap established to do this. So the question I am trying to ask here is, will this ISO um, provide us with a good way to structure a roadmap to do that? Or should the company be considering a different approach, like maybe a consultant?
Apparently, it's a very I guess complex question a little bit here, but the like like you said, the oh, I lost you. Where are you? Here you are. So the idea, I stopped sharing, right? I'm not
Yes,
sharing
you
anymore.
stop sharing.
Okay. So the idea that you've already gone through 27,000 is actually good news, number one, right? Because like I said, it gets you 30-40% of the way there. But it is important that people definitely realize that there are other things in place. Um, I don't think anyone is going to read the standard if they don't have like a Sherpa, like a guide working alongside with them, telling them, helping them understand what it means, right? And so yes, risk managers they're going to read the standard and things like that. But I think at some point you're going to need some kind of outside expertise, also people that understand maybe other organizations, other industries. Um, so I think my purpose here is to make people curious enough and that they want to learn more about it, that they may want to start doing some things like that 30-90 day map. Those are things that people can start doing. Um, and then when they realize they want to have someone look at it, then they can bring someone else with knowledge. And I think it's a combination of both.
Thank you. That's a very good advice. Most likely, this is how ISO 27000 went.
Yeah. All right, all right, all right. Anybody else have questions? I know we're over our time. Yes, boards and management teams, those are definitely the the bread and butter of the people that I'm working with. Yes, absolutely. The boards have such I didn't even touch on that, but this is such a concern in some of the board meetings these days that for sure boards definitely need to get on board and get with this because, like I said, the cost of waiting is huge. But yes, that's what I've been doing. All right, everybody. All right. Let's see. Thank you, Shana. Thank you guys for coming, obviously. And I'm going to provide the link to the replay because I know I went through some things very fast. So you'll have the link to the replay. I'm gonna look at which one is better, the Zoom or the other one I'm capturing, and then I'll share that with you. But appreciate everyone showing up today. Where can we get you to help us? Oh, I had it on that. Oh, my bad. I had it on that last slide. So most of you came through LinkedIn. Let me see. Should I share this again? Here is my LinkedIn. Where is my share? Zoom share. You can come on, man. Oh, here's my share. What am I doing? I think you should be able to. Can you see my screen now again, Fernando and people?
Yes.
Yes,
All
we
right,
can see
perfect.
it.
So this is my
Yes.
information, and also this QR takes you to my LinkedIn uh, profile. So, like I said, most of you are connected with me, but if I share this with people that are not connected with me, thank you for reminding me this is where they can connect with me and find me. But also my website is areitogroup.com, as it says here, AREITO group.com. And there's my phone number. All righty.
Excellent. Thank you, Eddie.
All
Thank
right,
you,
man.
Eddie.
All right, everybody.
Thank
Anybody
you.
else? All right, 1.1.